Hello, dear. Rosalie Jean here. I got a letter last month from a woman in Ohio, well, an email, but in my head I still call them letters. And she told me something I bet a few of you have felt too. She said she'd spent her whole Saturday afternoon on a loaf of bread, measured everything careful, watched it rise on the counter, doubled up nice and proud, just the way the recipe promised it would, baked it 40 minutes at 450 degrees Fahrenheit, pulled it out golden on top, smelling like something wonderful. Then she cut into it, and there it was, that gray gummy strip running right through the middle of the loaf, maybe half an inch thick, dense as a doorstop, sitting under a crust that had promised her so much more, top third of the loaf, light as anything. But that middle band just never rose the way it should have. Heavy, wet, the kind of thing where you try to butter it and the butter just tears a hole straight through. If that's happened to you, and I'd bet money it has, I want to say something plain right up front. It was not your recipe. Now, I know that's not what you've been told. You've probably gone back through every ingredient in your kitchen wondering if the flour had gone stale, or the yeast was dead, or you used the wrong salt, or some website's theory about water temperature was the missing piece all along. There's a whole industry out there that wants you to believe good bread is fragile, that it only works if you get 15 different things exactly right. That's the real trouble here. Not your kitchen, not your hands, not you. It's this idea that bread is complicated. It isn't. Folks have been making it in ordinary kitchens with ordinary ingredients for thousands of years, long before anybody owned a thermometer or a kitchen scale. What actually causes that dense center, nearly every time, is one step that happens after the first rise. Most recipes mention it in a single throwaway line. Most people rush right past it without a second thought. Get that one step right, and I promise you, that gray band disappears. Your loaf rises even, crust to center, with the exact same flour and yeast already sitting in your cabinet. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what that step is, why it matters more than almost anything else in the whole process, and how to do it with your own hands so you can feel it, not just follow along blind. Stick with me to the end, too. There's a little trick with your oven I'll show you that most home bakers never think to try, and it's the difference between a loaf that looks fine and one that makes your whole house smell like a bakery. I've been baking bread in my own kitchen for over 50 years now. My mother taught me on a wooden table that wobbled on one leg, and her mother taught her the same way before that. Nobody in my family ever weighed flour on a scale. We went by feel. And in 50 years of doing this most every week of my life, I've made just about every mistake there is to make, including the very gummy loaf we're about to talk through. So let me tell you what nobody ever told me, dear, because somebody should have, a long time before they finally did. Here's the part I want you to really lean in for, because once this clicks, you won't look at a loaf of bread the same way again. When dough finishes its first rise, it's full of tiny pockets of gas. That's just yeast doing its work. It eats the sugars in the flour and breathes out carbon dioxide, and that gas gets caught inside the gluten, which is nothing more than the stretchy protein web that forms once flour and water get mixed and worked. Think of that web as thousands of little balloons all tangled together, holding their breath. Here's the problem. After that first rise, those pockets are big, and they're uneven. Some are huge, some tiny, some bunched up in one corner and barely there in another. If you shape that dough as is, without doing a thing to it first, you're taking a lopsided structure and asking it to bake evenly. It can't. The spots with the biggest trapped pockets collapse under their own weight while baking, especially toward the center, where there's the least support from the crust forming around the outside. That collapse is your gray gummy band right there. The step that fixes it is called degassing and reshaping, though I'd just as soon you forget the fancy name. All it means is this: you gently press the air out of the dough, then build it back up with your own two hands into a tight, even shape. You're not punching the life out of it, you're not starting over, you're resetting it, taking those thousands of uneven balloons and turning them into thousands of small, even ones, all roughly the same size, held together by a gluten structure you've just made tighter through the way you fold and shape it. Here's the one line worth remembering, the kind you could repeat to a friend standing over her own bowl of dough, wondering where it all went wrong. Bread doesn't rise even because it happened to fall that way. It rises even because you built it that way, with your hands, after the first rise. Keep that in your back pocket next time you're staring down a bowl of risen dough, deciding whether to rush this next part. Let me walk you through it properly now, the way my mother showed me, and the way I've sanded it down over 50 years of getting it wrong before I got it right. First thing, stop being afraid of your dough. I say that because I've watched so many people, myself included, years back, treat a risen dough like it was made of glass. They lift the towel, see that beautiful puffed up ball, and get nervous, like pressing too hard is going to undo all their work. So they barely touch it, just kind of nudge it into a pan and hope for the best. That timid touch is exactly where the trouble starts. You want to turn that dough out onto a lightly floured counter and press down on it, firm, with the flat of your hand, working from the center out, the way you'd flatten a pie crust. Don't be gentle here. You want to hear that soft hiss of air letting go. That's a good sound, not a bad one. That's you releasing all those lopsided pockets so you can start fresh. Press until it's about an inch thick clear across. No thicker, no thinner. Skip this, or give it just a light poke or two, and you leave those big pockets sitting right where they were, waiting to turn into your dense strip later on. My mother used to say, dough could tell when you were scared of it. I couldn't tell you if that's true in any scientific sense, but I'll say this much. The best home bakers I know handle their dough with real confidence at this stage. Not roughness, confidence. Second thing, and this is where most folks trip up even after they've learned to press the air out, the shaping itself. Once the air's out, fold the dough back into a tight shape, and tight is the word to hold on to. Take one edge, fold it to the center, press to seal. Turn a quarter turn. Fold again. Do that 4 or 5 times, working your way round, until you've got a tidy little bundle. Then, and this is the part almost everybody skips, cup both hands around the dough and drag it toward you across the counter in short, quick pulls, giving it a slight turn each time. That dragging motion builds surface tension on the outside, same as pulling a bedsheet tight across a mattress. That tight outer skin is what traps the gas evenly through the second rise, so instead of pockets forming wherever they please, they form small and even, all through the crumb. I taught this to my granddaughter once, when she was maybe 9, standing on a stool next to me at the counter. She dragged her little ball of dough across the flour, looked up at me, and said, "Grandma, it's like giving the bread a hug so it knows to hold itself together. I've never heard it put better, and I've been at this 50 years. You're giving the dough a hug so it knows to hold itself together." That's the whole idea of shaping right there. Skip this and just fold the dough loosely, or drop it straight in the pan without building that tension, and you get a loose, saggy structure. It might still rise some, but it rises uneven, ballooning where the structure's weak and staying flat where it isn't. And that unevenness bakes right into the crumb. Third thing, giving the second rise, what we call proofing, the right amount of time and the right kind of attention. This is where impatience does the most damage, more than almost anything else on this list. Once your dough is shaped and sitting in its pan, it needs to rise again, usually somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour, depending how warm your kitchen runs. Don't just watch the clock, watch the dough. I use a simple poke test. Press one finger about half an inch into the side, then pull back. If it springs back right away, all the way, it's not ready. Give it more time. If the dent just sits there and never fills back in at all, you've let it go too far, and it's liable to collapse in the oven. What you want is a slow, gentle spring back, filling in about halfway over a few seconds. That tells you the structure's relaxed just enough to expand beautifully in the oven while still holding enough strength to keep its shape while it does. And here's my honest caveat, because I promised you I'd never oversell anything. That poke test is a fine tool, but it isn't perfect for every dough out there. A very wet, sticky dough, the kind you'd use for a rustic ciabatta or an ambitious sourdough, behaves differently, and pressing into it can deflate it worse than a firmer sandwich dough would ever tolerate. For those wetter doughs, I go more by sight than by touch, watching for that same soft, puffed look rather than pressing in at all. So use the poke test as your main guide for a standard loaf, but know it's a guide, not gospel, once you start branching into other kinds of dough. Fourth thing, and this one surprises people, what you do in the last moments before that loaf goes in the oven. Take a sharp blade or a clean razor and score the top, one confident cut about half an inch deep, straight down the center, or at a shallow angle if that's more your style. People assume this is decoration. It isn't. That score gives the loaf a controlled place to expand during those first few minutes of baking, what bakers call oven spring, that last burst of gas expansion before the crust sets for good. Skip the scoring and the loaf still expands, but it cracks wherever it wants to, usually right along the weakest point in that outer skin you worked so hard to build. Sometimes it splits along the side and sags right back down, undoing a good bit of the work you just did shaping it. Fifth thing, the one I promised you at the start, your oven itself. Smallest change on this whole list, biggest payoff. Most home ovens aren't nearly as hot as the dial claims. I learned this the hard way, years back, after buying myself a simple oven thermometer, the kind that just hangs off the rack, because I could never figure out why my bread wasn't quite matching what I remembered from my mother's kitchen. My oven, set to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, was actually sitting closer to 410 degrees Fahrenheit. That's enough of a gap to slow down your oven spring and give the dough more time to sag before the crust sets, which, wouldn't you know it, feeds right back into that same dense center we've been chasing this whole time. So here's the trick. Preheat your oven with an empty, heavy pot inside it, lid on, cast iron if you've got it, for a full 30 minutes, not the 10 or 15 most recipes tell you. Then carefully set your shaped loaf inside that hot pot, lid back on, and bake covered for the first 20 minutes before taking the lid off for the rest of the bake. That hot pot works like a little oven inside your oven, holding heat and steam right around the loaf during those crucial first minutes when the spring happens. It also covers for an oven running cooler than its dial claims, because that concentrated heat sets the crust fast, and even before any sagging has the chance to start. Small change, barely any extra effort, but it's the difference, like I said, between a loaf that looks fine and one that makes your whole kitchen smell like a bakery. Now let's bring this all the way home, because I want you to walk away knowing exactly what you've gained here. That gummy, dense center was never about buying better flour or fancier yeast. A 5-pound bag of decent bread flour runs you around $4, and a fancier artisan flour might run closer to $9 or $10 for the same amount. That gap was never what stood between you and a good loaf. What stood between you and a good loaf was about 5 extra minutes of attention right after the first rise, 5 minutes of pressing, folding, and building tension into the dough instead of rushing it straight to the pan. Think about what that adds up to. A decent loaf from a bakery runs you somewhere around $7. Bake even 2 loaves a week at home instead, at under $1 a loaf in ingredients, and you're saving yourself close to $600 over the course of a year. But honestly, dear, the money was never really the heart of it, was it? The real payoff is smaller and warmer than that. It's your family wandering into the kitchen while the loaf's still cooling on the rack, somebody asking if they can cut into it before dinner's even ready. It's slicing into that loaf and seeing an even honeycombed crumb clear through, no gray band staring back at you. It's trusting your own 2 hands the next time you bake instead of bracing yourself for what you'll find when you cut it open. So here's your homework for the week, and I mean for you to actually do it, not just nod along and forget by Thursday. Next time you bake a loaf, after that first rise, press the dough down firm enough to hear that little hiss of air letting go, then fold it and drag it across the counter to build that tight surface tension we talked about. Don't skip it because you're in a hurry. That one step is really the whole video, boiled down to about 5 minutes at your counter. And when you try it, I'd love to hear how it goes. Tell me in the comments what kind of bread your own family always made growing up, the one that comes to mind when you think back on a warm kitchen. I read every single one of those comments, every one of them, and I love hearing about the loaves and the kitchens that came before ours. Next time, I'll show you the one ingredient swap that turns an ordinary sandwich loaf into something that tastes like it came from a little bakery out in the countryside, and just how much money that swap actually saves you over a year of baking. Bigger number than you'd guess. Until then, dear, keep your hands confident, keep your dough well rested, and always trust what 50 years in this kitchen has taught me to pass along to you. This is Rosalie Jean. I'll see you next time.